I'm here today with a lifelong friend, and I'm happy to have him, Mr. Wayne Saunders. Wayne, thank you so much for doing this with me today.
My pleasure, Nick.
Wayne, like me, is a native, and like me, he's never left Amelia Island. He's all his life. I guess you went off for a little while to California.
Yeah, moved up there for a little while, then moved to Carolina for a little while, but the island calls.
Yeah, that was me. I went to the military for a little while and came back and just couldn't leave it, just had to stay here.
Going back to the Catholic school, St. Michael's Academy.
Yeah.
Having our knuckles popped because we walked too fast through the water cooler trying to play with the dog.
Sister Philip Marie, Sister Michael Joseph,
Sister Geraldine.
Sister Geraldine, yeah. Oh my gosh, I always tell people what education I have, that's where I got it.
Oh yeah,
it was
exactly.
Whoo.
I mean, our classes were only like 14, 15, 16 students.
Oh yeah.
And it was a hands-on situation.
It was definitely a hands-on situation.
And they didn't mind putting hands on you.
Oh, no. And they would.
Which we don't regret.
No, we don't.
We don't regret.
We don't. Wayne, I always ask everybody I interview, especially those are, from here, what is some of your fondest memories of growing up here in Fernandina?
Well, I was just thinking, before I got here, I came past the post office, and those two lights that used to be out when I would get out of the school there at St. Michael's, I'd go and we would race Billy Crowley, Tommy Radigan. We would shimmy up that pole to see who could touch the light globe first.
Yeah.
Going into the old Florida National, and my first deposit was 21 silver dollars with Mr. Ferreira. And back then, all it required was a handshake.
Yeah, that was it.
There was no filling out contracts. I mean, it was a handshake, and that was it.
Yeah, it was.
And of course, leaving the freezette and circling to the main beach, and Uncle Tump had the skating ring and the putt-putt and the trampolines, the go-kart track across. Later on, opened up the water slide. And, we were the only time we ever had any issues in the community, per se, was when the circus came to town and the people who worked in the circus would do some vandalism.
That was pretty much it.
That was pretty much it. A drive-by in those days was getting hit by a cow patty in Callahan.
And folks, just to tell you about the circus, for those of you who have driven down North 2nd Street, where the port is today, where the warehouses are, that's where the circus used to come to town. And they would set up a huge tent. And, it was something else. Everybody would go and, pay their quarter to get in and see the circus, and
you paid?
No. Well, I was trying to be kind and nice, and, sometimes we paid, sometimes we didn't. And then sometimes we knew some people that got us in for free.
Yeah. Like the drive-in, we would climb in the trunk.
In the trunk of the car. And it was dollar night, but still we would have a trunk full, we just couldn't get any more in the car. And, but oh gosh, man, what memories.
And driving up, I remembered when your dad had his shop right about here. And what was Tony's brother's name that had the...
Tringali?
Yeah.
Yeah. John?
No, the one that had the Dixie Queen. Anyway, my Uncle Francis was working with him at the time, and they taught me how to mend a net. Mm-hmm. Then I'd have my hand line, put a piece of chicken on it, and go out there and catch a turtle, pull him up, get it out of his mouth, and let him go. And that was just part of growing up here. Turtles were never hurt. Then you have a bunch of people that come down here now. And I remember all the break-ins. So we moved out to the beach in 57. And I remember all the break-ins they would have. People, when you could drive on the beach, they'd back up to a house. And not everybody, it wasn't all locals who did the vandalism. But then when the Turtle Watch came about, which I don't have a big problem with, but they painted all the lights black so that as though God didn't know what to do with the turtles to get them back in the water. I'm sorry, I lived on this beach all my life, and I have never once
me either.
hit a turtle on the road, nor have I seen one. Now, maybe a little land gopher.
Different story, but never
story.
A loggerhead or anything
No,
like that.
nothing like that.
Yeah.
And we just had, the island was ours.
Yeah, it was. And I tell people all the time, but Wayne, when you and I grew up here, I've gone back and I've looked and I've tried to estimate. I don't believe there was 3,500 people on this whole island.
Oh, no.
And there was nothing here. Do you remember skipping school to go to McDonald's in Jacksonville to get shoestring French fries?
Yep. Did that. And I remember when the first Burger King opened up across
from the theater,
from the old Quaternut Theater.
Yep.
And for like 20, we could get a hamburger and French fries and a shake for like 35 cents.
Yeah. And people don't, you tell people, and it was a walk up. You just walked up to the window and told them what you wanted. But the reason that happened was a lot of people don't realize it, but Burger King started in Jacksonville, Florida. And I think one of the very first franchises they had was right here in Fernandina. And so that's why we had a Burger King here in Fernandina Beach.
Right there where Mr. Becker later on built his pharmacy.
Becker's drugstore. Wayne, I know you were a big surfer. And one of my main reasons wanting to talk to you today was about surfing here in Fernandina. In fact, I know that you were so big into surfing that you actually moved and went to Huntington Beach, California. But tell me a little bit about surfing. I know I tried it back when I was a kid, and after about 1,000 falls and busting my butt, I decided that wasn't for me.
Well, it all started with Ted Wass.
Yeah.
And Ted came back from Nam, and his head was pretty rattled.
Yeah.
So when he came in, we're up around Frisco somewhere. He just gravitated on down to around in San Diego area and stayed there around Cardiff and Blacks and bought a surfboard, one of the old, what they call pop-outs. A tiki is what it was. And Ted and I had been friends, but it was kind of shallow because his mom had and dad put him in GMA, Georgia Military Academy. So he wasn't growing up here with all of us. He was there. And so when Ted came back and, make contact with him, we would he would let me use his board with him. And after about every 45 minutes, we'd have to stick it up on his nose for it to drain, because it got so heavy we couldn't pick it up because it was leaking the fin. I mean, it was the days of the square wheel, and I just stuck with it. And Charlie Coleman had I think his first shop over on Norwood Avenue, across from the old Tropical Teen Club that we used to go to every weekend. And there was a band there, Little Robert and the Lemon Twisters. But we'd go talk with Charlie, and I bought my first board there. It was like $129, a Gordon Smith banana model. And it just kind of rolled from there. I wasn't into the contest and everything. It was just a passion.
Well, I know there was a lot of guys into surfing and a couple girls into it.
Yep.
And I think one of the first surfboards that I ever tried, I cut it at the boatyard on a piece of plywood. And, if you wanted to just belly surf, I call it, catch a wave, you could do that with that board, and it was a lot of fun. But to get out there on one of those boards that floated and think you were going to stand up and, do all the stuff, like you would see them do, I couldn't do it. And I'm too old and too brittle today to try it. But do you still surf at all?
Nope. I hadn't surfed probably about 10 years, but every time I watch him out there, goes through the motions. I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm there. I mean, I started when I was maybe 14, 15 years old, and went for about 12 years. Then about lost my life one time in Huntington, got knocked out on a big wave, and an old boy we used to call Wolfman Jack He looked just like the Wolfman Jack out of the radio show from WLS. And I had a free fall in the wave and hit there and put like 44 stitches right there and knocked me out. And I just felt a hand on my back of my little wetsuit top that pulled me up out and had laid me across the board till I came back to. And that Huntington in those days were tough. I'm in constant communication still, like with Bob Bolin, who had Greek surfboards out there, and I'm gonna have him on Facebook. And Bob, we have a story that Bob came over for about 2 weeks one time because we were selling a lot of his boards there at the shops that Terry McKendry had. And we went to a little Penny's where you get a big breakfast and coffee for 99 cents back in the day. And the woman asked him if he would like some grits, and he said, "How many do I get?" Well, that little redneck waitress thought that he was being smart, and she was fixing to climb plowing. And I said, "Ma'am, he's from California. They don't know what a grit is." And then she got the hair on the back of her neck kind of laid down a little bit. But that was, we were really fortunate, Terry having gotten out there first and made some communications, and he was managing the shop for Greek at the time. And we got him with the locals because out there, if you weren't in with the locals, you could get pulverized, taken off on their waves. It was just that way. I mean, they were ruthless because they were what they call soul surfers. They weren't out there to show off or anything. And it was just, and so I went out there probably about 3 or 4 times between flying and driving. And then it just kind of came a time that just needed to hand the torch on to somebody else. I wasn't going to try and ride something across the desert.
Birthdays will do that.
Yep. I mean, but I just lost the fire on the inside. I still enjoyed it. Yeah. And, I gave my brother a board the other day for him to use with his grandson, Zach. And I've given a board to my oldest granddaughter up in South Carolina. But it was just, I love watching it. Know everything you basically need to do. But just kind of lost the interest.
Wayne's dad owned the Sinclair Station on the corner of Fur and 8.
Yep.
Yeah. And I know how many times did I ride my bicycle up there and get air in the tires, And
it was almost a straight shot up from your house.
Well, it wasn't far. Me, Johnny Janino, there was a bunch of us. We would go up there, and that was the place to go to get air, And today, that same building, by the way, today is Gilbert's Underground Restaurant.
Yep.
That's where the Sinclair Station used to be. Same building. And so a lot has happened.
My wife and I went in there one day for a sandwich, and the waitress came over, and I said, "I can tell you what's behind that door over there." And she knew I'd never been in there. I said, "That's the bathroom that I used when I was a kid," and described to her the different bays and the outside and the workshop in the back. Lord, I knew that place like you knew the back of your dad's building place. I mean, if your dad had it, you worked there.
Some things just never change.
No, it doesn't. And some things don't need to change.
Some things don't need to change. You're right.
That's right.
Wayne, did you ever dream that we would see the growth that we got today?
No. I was told one time about a real estate deal by Mr. Ebert Phillips.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
That one of the old locals out there in Amelia was called by a title company in Jacksonville and was offered that land that is the south end for like $28,000. And that's when the titanium plant picked up, and they went when there was the big find in Venezuela, I think it was. And he said, it'll never be worth anything but for sand spurs and rattlesnakes. Yep. And $28,000, and he could have had all that is the plantation, except for Drummond Point, and an old black guy from Baltimore, Mr. Drummond, owned from the marsh 91 acres to the beach. And when he left, he sold it for $31,000. 91 acres.
Do you remember Jack Woodward.
Oh, yeah.
Jack and my grandfather, Mike Tiliakis, bought some acreage out there. And I want to say they paid like $40-something an acre. Now, this is out where the Omni is, and it was on the ocean side. And
Right.
I remember my grandmother, y'all are crazy. That's nothing but palmettos and rattlesnakes, and it's
That's
never
right.
going to be worth a dime, and you just throwed your money away.
Yep.
Well, several years went by, and I think they finally ended up selling it for like $90-something an acre. And of course, she was happy then because they more than doubled their money. But and of course, today I'd love to have all that acreage today. There's no telling what it would go for, you know.
Yeah, my great grandfather, he lived out and back of what's called now Brady Point.
Yeah, who was your great grandfather?
It was a Mr. Bennett. That was grandmama's daddy.
Okay.
And he bought he paid 50 cents an acre. And he was running moonshine. And because he had money and
honorable business
back then, you did it because you needed to eat, not because you
had a family to take care of.
That's right. And so one of his cousins got jealous and turned him in. And he had to sell mostly everything he had to get the money to get out of jail. And that's when Mr. Rudeshauser was sheriff. That was before Mr. Youngblood.
Wow.
And so, but he bought that originally for 50 cents an acre, Grandmama told me.
Well, we need to talk because my great-great-grandmother was a Bennett.
Okay, and, because my grandmother was Ada Bennett. Now she's kin to Cecilia's dad. Was grandmama's, I think, first cousin, and they came in from around the Satilla because she was born on the Satilla River. They had so many children they ran out of names, so they named her Satilla.
Satilla. You see, folks, I let that little bit of dialogue go on because this is the way the locals do it. And that was no joke when he said that his great-grandfather was a Bennett. I didn't know that, but my great-great-grandmother was a Bennett. And I'm going to go home and pull some genealogy that I have. And we just may end up not only lifelong friends, but we just may end up cousins here just because of this interview today.
I often joke about this girl I was going out on a date with, and we got to talking. And as it turned out, we were kin. So I shook her hand. I said, it probably would have been fun, but I don't live in the Appalachians. I do not live in the Appalachians. And I tell you, my middle daughter and her husband and two girls were just here. And Lily, the youngest one, she's 9. Boy, the beach is in her veins. Oh, Lord. Karis, this is her second home. My oldest daughter loves the beach, but she's in Darlington.
Yeah.
And she was born there, raised there, worked there, and she'll be put under there. But Karis has always said, this is home.
This is home.
This is home.
This is home.
But yeah, the Bennett's they had the last house going down to Nassauville. And the only house past them was Ed Blue, who was a slave. Now there's Blue Road, but that's not the same Blue. So his wife Maddie lived in the house where grandmother was raised, and they would eat there and everything. And they had the buckboard, and they'd go up to see Walter Murray's, and when Mr. Zetterauer had his place. But it was just a different time. When we lived, Dad bought his beach house for like $12,000 in '57, and I would have to hide a dime at the old Red Rooster because after 5 o'clock, nobody went down that road.
The Red Rooster.
The Red Rooster. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And then you had where Sonny's was. That was the Pines.
That was the Pines.
And matter of fact, somebody asked me one day. Matter of fact, it was Mr. Gerving that was offered the deal on the south end. But a while back, somebody was asking about something to do with the KKK. And see, in the beginning, the KKK was not a black-white thing. It was like the IRA in Ireland. If you beat your wife, if you were drunk and beat your children, they took care of you.
Mm.
It's only when a bunch of riffraff got into it that it became a black-white thing. And I told him, I said, I vaguely remember as a child going to the first KK meeting. W.E. Barber let them have this flatbed, and they put it right on the side of the road where Sonny's is, right in front of the pines.
Yeah.
And Marshall Rowland and them had their band up there.
Playing music.
And I said, I remember being there, and it was like the week after, 2 weeks after, in the Fernandina News Leader, they came out and said that it was the 50-year anniversary from the first KKK meeting in town. And of course, you were probably there with us when we stood on the wall and watched Cumberland.
Oh yeah,
the Dungeness.
Oh gosh, yeah. We sat right here on these docks and watched Dungeness. The whole sky over there was just red glow. And the night that burned, and then also the night that Sarah Alice's house burned.
Yep.
And we went, of course, I've done a session on Sarah Alice, but we went over there the next day with Dr. Bailey Dickens, and but her body's never been found at all.
My mom knew several people involved in that situation. Before she passed, she said, Wayne, I'll tell you who did away with that woman. And that'll go with me to my grave. But it was back then, the suspicions were very high. It was not something that was elusive. And of course, those people are probably already gone by now, because Mom passed about 4 years ago. She was like 86.
Yeah, Wayne's mother, I can tell you guys right now, Wayne's mother was just absolutely just one gorgeous, knockout gorgeous lady. I always thought to myself, I would see these stars in Hollywood and I would think, Miss Saunders could go to Hollywood and she could knock them all down, every one of them.
I used to introduce her as my sister. And she would get so tickled, Nick. She would get so tickled, but she was, but having been raised in the country the way there was a lot of things she had to overcome, because back then they did not know gentleness and meekness and politeness. It was all about take care of business and survive till the next day. So in her later years, she really began to mellow out, which was good, and got to enjoy great grandchildren. And so, it was a good time. I mean, the islands is a memory box for us.
It is. It's a time machine. And, a lot of times I tell people I feel like I'm in a time warp, that, I don't care how much it changes, because when I ride down the street, I don't really look at the changes so much. I look at, I remember what was here and the way it used to be. So that to me, I mean, that's the time warp that I live in. And it's just like doing these series, we're doing these series because I'm passionate about just for the old timers like you and I to bring these memories back, but for the newcomers so they will know what it was like to grow up here in Fernandina back in the 50s and 60s.
And, just a point, during the winter, we would rent a house on the beach, and it was around $35.
Yep.
And during the summer, you could rent any house on the beach for $100.
Yep.
But
you won't do that anymore.
No, but it was just easy living. It was easy going. The stores, Pete Pappas and all those places, they didn't even lock the back doors.
Didn't need to.
The only time you had to watch anything was when the circus came.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're not picking on circus people, but that's
about it.
That's just the way it was. And like we were saying, a lot of the people, the locals, have gotten so lazy that they've let a lot of out-of-staters, out-of-towners come in and take over our island.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to be offensive, but I'm just being straight.
And I told somebody the other day, I said, what really, coming from the shrimping and the boat building world, what really bothers me is the waterfront. And, I'm afraid that before long, the only shrimp boat we're going to have is in a photograph or a painting, and that's sad.
It
You know,
is.
it's very sad, and but I see it coming, and I don't know what can be done about it. I guess nothing now. You know, all the waterfront property pretty much is gone, but you know, that's the way it is.
But for us that have grew up here, I know Mom, she wasn't the manager. She worked at the first welcome station that they had here, and Uncle Francis ran the docks.
He did.
And then you got on with the fire department. And
yeah, I worked with him for 25 years.
Yep, and Francis told me one time when he was working on the Dixie Queen with Joe Tringale.
Joe, there you go.
They were coming in one time there in front of the fort, and they were like cleaning off the deck and everything. They had pulled the nets up, and it was kind of rough, and he fell off the boat. And it was dark, and he said, nobody saw me fall off, Wayne. He said, but as it went by, I kind of got swept around the back, and I was able to grab the netting, and I pulled myself back up on the boat.
God bless him. If he hadn't.
Well, I mean, it would have been all over because that current travels at what, like around 11 knots, 12 knots?
On a half tide, it's 6 knots. So I imagine on a full tide, it would be around 10 anyway. Well, Wayne, I certainly have enjoyed this, brother.
Right, me too. I tell you what.
And I'm going to go ahead and push the limits and say thank you, cuz.
Hey,
because it just might be that we've ended up being cousins.
If you had Dennis in your background, we were part of the only Dennis that came to
They
town.
were, and she lived in Camden County. So who knows, it could be. But, I really appreciate, the stories today. And that's what this whole series is about, is the stories and, the way the island used to be. And I hope for a lot of you old timers, you can sit back and say, my gosh, I remember that. Or, that's the way it used to be. This is the way I remember it. And for you newcomers, I want you to say, wow, I didn't know that. I can visualize that, or I can see that. And
it was easy living.
It was. It was.
Now, we didn't recognize the fullness of it at the time, but we'd leave the freezette, go to the beach, make the circle, come down here, circle that dock, and back to the freezette.
Yep.
And all the locals were hanging out. Billy Griffin and all of them boys was there. Yep. And I mean, it was, for somebody in the big city, they would turn their nose up at it.
Yeah.
But
that was it. I mean, that was our life. That's what we did, and
it was good.
I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Oh, no.
If I had to go back and do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. That's
I
the
wouldn't.
way it is. Yeah.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed growing up here.
And would do it all over again.
It's home.
Yeah, me too. It's home.